Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So for this presentation, I don't have a live poll. So for those who were in the previous session, that was an exciting aspect of what we were discussing. But for this topic, and we'll have time to kind of talk a little bit more about it later, inshallah, but I want to focus on kind of three aspects of what I include when I think about sort of the beauty of mentoring, but also of service. So I think about three things: strengths, self-care, and service. Okay, and so for me, just to kind of give you an overview of how I come to the work and sort of my approach, one is to always value both the passion and the creativity and the energy of young people, but also the wisdom and the experience and the expertise of elders. And often, unfortunately, I feel like not just within the Muslim community, but in a lot of different settings, we often pit one against the other. Right? And so it's, well, older people are sort of rigid, inflexible, they have a certain way of doing things and they want it done very specifically. And then there's youth who's like, well, they're so old, outdated, they don't know what's going on, that's not even, sort of like out of fashion. And so it's almost seen or perceived as if the elders and the youth are sort of at odds. And this is really not the case. And so we have to think about how we can really harvest or kind of harness the energy of what every single member of the community has to offer. Okay? And so that, one of the sort of profound statistics for me about the community is the fact that almost 40%, I think the exact number is maybe 42% of the American Muslim community is between the ages of 18 and 30. Think about that. 40% of the community, right, 18 to 30. So what does this mean for us in the next 10, 15, 20 years? Right? And what I have said, and I'm adamant about this, is that if we are not engaging, one, with elders and with our youth, in 20 years, our community momentum, whether or not it's sustainable, whether or not it's beneficial, will be extremely crippled. If in the next 10 years, I'm not engaging in someone who's, say, like 25, maybe right out of college, or working, thinking about a profession, if that person is cut out of leadership, doesn't have a mentor, it's almost feeling like, and this is sort of what happened to many of the friends that I have, my age, which I'm not going to tell you, but many people felt like, well, you know what, I was pushed and encouraged to gain a level of expertise, either in education, for me it was psychology, and I find, and particularly with women, I find that I cannot go back to my faith community and utilize this expertise that I have, right? There are no leadership opportunities available to me, right? Or if I'm involved in perhaps some mosque activities, right? I'm 25, perhaps with an MBA, and someone wants me to run childcare. This is not a good use of my brain or my time or my expertise, right? Because I'm a woman does not mean I'm only going to talk about women's issues, right? That's always going to be sort of one of the lenses through which we view a lot of the issues that impact the community, but it is not the only area in which I can affect change, right? So think about how incredibly frustrating that is for someone who can say, you know what? I can go to a Fortune 500 company, make 6 figures, they value the expertise that I have and the educational background that I have, but I want to be able to give this knowledge, right, and my passion to my community first. But then I show up to a meeting and, oh, sister, can you take notes? No, that's not what I like to do, right? And so thinking about how we sort of put people in very confined roles so that they can't really begin to express the things that they're most involved and most engaged in. The other aspect to this is if we are not thinking about how we document the wisdom of our elders, we are doomed to repeat some mistakes that are completely unnecessary. right? And so when we think about even the members of the community that I can bring to mind that we've lost in this year alone, that is treasure that we cannot reclaim, right? And so why are we waiting until we're at someone's janazah? Like, no one ever wrote down this person's story, right? People are walking around, one of my dear friends is Dr. Sawad Abdul Kabir, right? Her mom passed away a couple months ago. This is a woman who was in the Black Panther Party. She converted to Islam, involved in so many different, building organizations, just a walking, history of particularly Black Islam in America, but also kind of the evolution of how women engaged in the mosque, the things that they created around education, around social services, and particularly in Brooklyn, right? And, alhamdulillah, there was a process, if you go to Sapelo Square, which Sawad founded, of a project that's, sort of in its infancy stages about how we tell the stories of who we are. Oral history is such a significant component of many of our cultures, right? You're taught to sit and listen. What do people have to say? What do they tell you about perhaps the things you don't get to read in your history books, but they lived it, right? And so, and sometimes they say it so casually. Yeah. Oh yeah, I remember when I met Malcolm X. You did what? Oh yeah. And you're like, okay, how did I not know this, right? Or some other significant historical figure. And they're like, oh, I remember we were driving somewhere together, and you're like, okay, and what did you talk about, right? And so for them, this is like me sitting here, right, with these three women, and then, inshallah, in the future, my grandchildren are like, you knew Sheikh Aisha Prime? You knew Asha Noor? Oh, are you serious? Tell me about these women. Right? And so the history that we take for granted that is right with us, right? We don't fully appreciate how much it can offer us. So, and I think these are like beautiful sort of bridges that we begin to create when we're like, young people are very passionate, right? You guys are often like full of very, conviction about some particular things, right? But there's so many opportunities for teaching to happen both ways, right? And when I think about my grandmother who sends me text messages, I'm like, Graham, like emojis used appropriately, right? And I'm thinking, there's no one who's past the age of learning, right? People are always curious, right? And so think about all of, and it's been shown, research has shown, that for older people who are engaged with either children or youth, right, there's so much health benefit and emotional benefit to that connection, right? So why are we living in a culture, in a community that isolates older people, right, exacerbates their level of stress, right, shortens their lifespan, when one of the remedies could be have someone who's just willing to listen to the stories they have to share about their lives. They're amazing, right? And so these two segments, right, of our community do not have to be at odds, right? So I'm sort of like the middle generation, right? I'm not quite a youth, or sometimes I think I like to be, until my daughter reminds me that I'm not. And she was like, Mom, why'd you say facts? Like, you're a mom. You're not supposed to like use that kind of terminology. I'm like, well. And so my parents' generation, right, converted to Islam in the late 70s. I was born and raised Muslim in Brooklyn. They were doing some really dynamic things, right, about being visibly Muslim during a time when people are like, why are you walking around with all those clothes on your head, right? And they were stylish about it. I mean, these were the women in my community, right? My mother was a seamstress. I didn't buy clothes until I went to college, right? She was the kind of person I'd be like, you know what, Umi, I need a pair of pants for tomorrow. I got you. Right? And then I went to college, I was like, I don't even know what size I am. Like, how do you do, literally, I'm not exaggerating. I had to ask friends, how do you know what size you are? Right? And so if I'm in between these two generations, what is my role? Right? I tell young people who reach out to me either about information around mental health, psychology, and they're always like so nervous, right? It's like, no, I don't want to waste your time. And I'm like, this is where I should be investing it. Truly. Like, I am at your service. For one selfish reason. If you don't have what you need as a young person, what is my life going to be in 20 years? Right? It's going to be diminished. It's going to be very crippled, right? Because I haven't given you what you need in order to reach your full potential. You are going to be the leadership of this community. But if you have no guidance, if no one is validating and affirming your worth, right, where are we going to be as a community? And this may be now 40 years post 9/11, right, when we have all these identity issues and how do we integrate all aspects of who we are, right? This is what I should be devoting my service to, right? And so 3 things that I want to emphasize. Think about, what are your personal strengths? And this is not the time for, mashallah, right? We're so socialized. And humility is very important, right? But we're so socialized to minimize, right, the gifts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, right? So if someone asked you right now, write down your top 3 strengths. What gifts do you have that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you? Specifically, everyone has them. I want you to write them down. Top 3. And I don't want you to say something like, I'm nice. Right? I'm kind. Those are characteristics, those are, some values that you may embody. Awesome. Right? But what do you have? Either creativity, something that you're really interested in, passionate about, right? That sort of gives you drive and motivation, like it kind of wakes you up in the morning. What are you really, really into, right? And how can that gift then be something that you give of service to others, right? Every single person in this room has at least 3, okay? Second thing, self-care. I talk about this all the time, right? The analogy that I give is, do you want someone on your team who's well rested, right? Not on the injury list, not walking around with a wound, right? Who doesn't eat properly, who is not hydrated, right? Who should be on bed rest, but they're showing up to the marathon like, yeah, I got this. And you're like, no, you're not on my team, right? Do you want someone on your team who hasn't taken care of their bodies, their minds, their spirits? Do you? No, right? You would say, you know what, I love your enthusiasm, but I think you need to go rest. This is what self-care looks like. We cannot be engaged in all issues all of the time. It is okay for us to say, you know what, today, it's difficult. The first text that I got when I landed this morning was that Erica Garner had passed away. And subhanAllah, like tears just came to my eyes. And I said, you know what, I can't, right? I wanted to look and kind of see, and I caught myself. I was on Twitter and I was Facebook, what are people saying, when it happened? And I was like, you know what, I will be completely undone if I spend too much time reading all of the tweets, reading all of the Facebook posts, right? This was devastating, right? If you don't know who Erica Garner is, her father was Eric Garner. We may have heard the phrase, I can't breathe, right? He was murdered in July 2014. His daughter picked up, right, his campaign for justice, wanting to, for people to not forget her father's name. She had a massive heart attack, right? 27 years old. I think she has a 1-year-old child. She's this older child, but, just recently had a baby. So when we talk about self-care, it's not from a place of indulgence, right? It's not like, oh, I'll do that when I have the time, right? I saw this quote a couple of weeks ago, and it said, instead of saying, I don't have time, say, it's not a priority for me, and see how that feels, right? If someone says, oh, well, do you get exercise? Do you get enough food? What is your sleep like? How much sleep are you getting? That's a very important question for someone who's a leader, for someone who's engaged, a student. How much sleep are you getting? Right? And so when someone says, oh, I don't really have time for that, no, just say it's not a priority, right? Because we make time for what we want to do, always. So when we think about self-care, think about it as nutrition, as nourishment, right? What do we need in order to keep showing up for our community, right? I don't want someone who's on crutches with a bandaged leg, right, that hasn't slept in 25 hours saying, I'm ready to work. Not with me, you're not. Right? So let's try to move away from self-care being like an event. Right? Oh, I'm going to have a girls' weekend. We're going to get out, manicure and a massage. That's an event. Right? And we often plan it long after it's actually due. We're already past like the critical point when we should have done all of that. Right? By the time you're looking down at your feet like, whoa, wow, I'm glad it's winter and I'm wearing shoes that are closed. Right? That means we're already past the time we should have taken care of our bodies. Right? So how do we build it as a practice? Right? Not as an event, right? It often looks like someone who's like laying like on a massage table, right? Some of us can't afford that every day, right? So it shouldn't be an event, it should be a practice. And there's, if you go on Instagram and maybe put in like boring self-care, I follow this woman because it's amazing. Some of the things that we think that it should be like grand, right? The things that I do to take care of myself. Right? It should be something that I could take a picture of and post it for everyone to envy, right? But sometimes, and this is what the woman is sort of highlighting with boring self-care, sometimes I clip my toenails, right? We talk about cleanliness, even as Muslims. I clip my toenails, right? For me, it was organizing my khimars, my scarves. I was like, man, I have way too many. And they're beautiful, and I don't wear them. Right? So I was like, I need to like declutter a little bit because this also says something about my mental state, right? When things are in disarray and you go into a room and you feel like, oh, I can't even think here, I can't pray here, it's too much happening, right? That may be an outward manifestation of your mental state, okay? Self-care is very, very important. Final thing I'll say is, when you think about the strengths that you have, how you maintain your stamina, your self-care, really your self-worth, how do you translate that into service to other people, right? Because the more you give away, the more Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you, right? Have you ever, kind of given maybe like your last dollar or two, right? Sometimes I give away money to people who just ask, right? Somebody, how do you know they're not gonna, I don't care what they're using it for. Giving it to them is not for them, it's for me. Because Allah is testing me with my wealth, right? He's testing me with everything I have. So if I give it away, do I trust in the Creator enough that He will give it back to me 10, 20, 30-fold, right? That's the test. And so if He has already given me these gifts, these strengths, these like powerful tools that I have at my disposal, and I'm showing my appreciation for them, by taking care of myself, my next step is to say, now, what do I do in order to give back? For me, that looks like mentoring, especially young Black Muslims, right? It looks like how many don't know a Black Muslim psychologist? It's like, I never even heard of that. Therapy, counseling, that's not even promoted in most of our communities, right? For a long time, I was the only one I knew. And I said, that's unacceptable. So I started to find and reach out. But for someone who's 19, 20, and your parents are like, nah, I think you need to go with the sure thing, and that's probably not social work, right? They're looking for someone to say, well, show me how this can be useful, right? It may not be lucrative, right, in the sort of like the capitalistic sense, but it will be of such benefit to the community, right? And then what will the Creator give to me in return? Because I've responded to His call. I've shown appreciation for the gifts that He's given me. And so along with the strengths, everyone in this room has a contribution to make. In order for our community to be as healthy as it can be in the next 20, 25 years, we need every single person in this room. Right? So what is going to be your particular contribution? And again, this does not have to look like something that is grand, something that is like, I started a movement. I mean, come on, right? It could be, there is an elderly person who lives in the same building that I'm in, and I go read to that person for an hour a day, right? You have no idea. You may not see the impact of that in the moment, or even in like the first couple of years, right? But what you may find is the person said, you know what, I was so incredibly lonely, right? I almost didn't have really anything to live for. I've outlived all of my friends. I may have even outlived my children. But the fact that you were so consistent and pleasant and you spent time with me, subhanAllah, it just gave me life, literally. So everyone has a contribution to make. I don't want anyone to think like, well, I don't know what I have to offer. I don't really know how I can be of any use. Every single person in this room has a contribution to make. And so if we take care of ourselves, if we acknowledge our strengths, and we give back to our community, there really is no limit to the possibilities that we can create in this room alone and in the community. So I would encourage all of you to think about, how am I caring for myself? Am I acknowledging and showing appreciation for the gifts that Allah has given me? Am I thinking about how I can then give back and return? Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.